Hi, everyone. Welcome to our seventh edition of 10 plus 3 Canadians United for Long-Term Care Standards. Tonight is a really special episode that we have. First, I just want to say that Melissa can't be with us. She had other obligations. And we did have someone named Paula Historic from Saskatchewan that was to be with us, but she also was not able to be present. But I'm really pleased tonight to have a town hall that's actually really important to me, really important, I hope, to all Canadians. We're talking to family advocates and people who have been affected by long-term care, have had family in long-term care, have had experiences that are important to hear their experiences, so that in an effort really not only to make people aware, but to prevent it from happening anymore. So we speak so that you won't have to one day. And that's our hope. And I just want to say, it takes a lot of courage and bravery to come into a public forum and share something that's so incredibly personal and also really upsetting in some cases. Well, really in all cases. It's personal, it's upsetting. You have to sort of lay part of yourself bare and be vulnerable. And I really, really appreciate, I know that from experience, and I really appreciate all of our guests here tonight. It means a lot that I asked and you answered. And I think that everything you have to say is really important. I just want to pass it quickly to Vivian to say hello and see if she has anything to say, and then we'll get right into our guest speakers. Vivian?
Hi. Well, I think everyone's heard more than enough from me, so I'm not going to speak too much. I'm much more interested in hearing your experiences, because God knows I've heard so many as is over this past year. And I don't think we can share enough stories to really just communicate how difficult this was for far too many Canadians in every province. No province was spared. So I'm really happy we have a group of people from across Canada, and I hope we can give you the opportunity to speak your truth and to really communicate with our federal government, our provincial governments, as to what they really need to start doing to fix long-term care.
Thanks, Vivian. So I don't want to take up too much time myself. But as Vivian said, national standards is what we're all here for. And part of the reason why we've had these discussions is because of people like this from across the country who are willing to speak up. So without saying any more on my own, I would first like to introduce Kitra Channa, and she has her father in Montreal long-term care home. So Kitra, I leave it to you.
Thank you. So my name is Kitra, and yeah, it's been a really long year. I think we all feel that. Like, I feel like my father's a survivor. We're survivors. At his long-term care home, there were over 200 residents who got COVID, about the same number of workers who got COVID, and about 70 residents who died over the course of the year. And, it was right from the very beginning, it was obvious that, like, at least to our family, like, oh God, we need to evacuate him. Like, this is going to be a disaster. And that was my first instinct, like, can we bring him home? My father is 67, he's quadriplegic, so he's a younger resident, but has a lot of needs. He's 6'3", and caring for him at home would have been very, very complicated, and we started exploring that option. But my mother's a social worker at another residence, so she has a good sense of the system, and we were hearing stories about how difficult it was for people who had loved ones at home to have consistent care. So we decided not to bring him home. We thought that would be too difficult, also with her going from the house into a residence and then back home again, that would just create a really complicated situation. And so my second instinct was, okay, then let's start organizing. Like, how are we going to protect our loved ones? How are we going to protect the workers? And there was a lot of activism going on right at the beginning of the pandemic, all of these like mutual aid organizations popping up. And so I started checking in, like, oh, who's working to like protect the elders and the workers in long-term care. And in that first month, I found that the public, it was just silence, and I don't think people understood how, what we were going to experience was like really the eye of the storm. And not only that, but I think the initial instinct from the medical community was to protect the hospitals and to not protect us, and to protect our loved ones. And to, over the course of the year, we saw like bans basically put on the number of residents who could go to hospitals, and that makes you wonder how many could have been saved. There was a lot of pressure right at the beginning to change the advanced orders. You'd see like the people, the I guess doctors coming back to families again and again saying, are you sure you don't want to change it? Like, and so really not giving residents a fighting chance. And that just speaks to what I kind of see as the ageism, the ableism, and also the racism, because so many of the workers are people of color or immigrants who work in these facilities. So it's really a matter of disposability, and saying like, care is important, care is critical, and the motto of nobody is disposable, that's really one that I've connected to in this past year. So my second initiative to like start organizing, I started a Facebook group for the families at our residence, and I think at this point we have almost 400 or 500 members. We created WhatsApp groups for every floor of the building, so that families and residents could, those who could be in communication with each other, because there was a lot of pandemonium right at the beginning. We weren't being communicated with, so we had to really fight to be communicated with. It was a constant fight. It was a year of like fighting so hard to have our loved ones' voices heard. And yeah, it's been rough. And I guess the other thing that I did in this year was I started an initiative called Artists for Long-Term Care, because I feel that we're a part of a movement, and every movement needs its iconography, it needs its storytellers, needs its artwork that kind of inspires people to understand what's at stake and what are the stories. So I myself, I'm a filmmaker and a photographer, and so I've been running this Instagram account to just raise awareness and trying to get artists to make artwork for our cause, and just trying to do what I can. Thank you.
Thanks, Kitra. Yeah, I wanted to mention that I first was in touch with Kitra last year through her artwork. That's how we met, was Artists for Long-Term Care. And they did all of the artwork for Broken Hearts, Empty Shoes, which we had in November. And then Kitra was giving us updates on what was happening in her dad's home periodically. So it was upsetting. And we know Quebec was one of the 2 hardest hit provinces in Canada. So a lot of emotion, and it's exhausting, right? It's exhausting. Thank you for your words. I now wanted to pass it on to Melody Holmes, who is living in Ontario, but her father is in Nova Scotia. Hi, Melody.
Hi, thanks so much, Kathy. And thanks, Kitra, for sharing. I wanted to say that I've been attending these town halls and loving them. I've been doing a lot of listening and tuning in, and some of the stories that have been shared have been unthinkable, and they've hit my heart and my head so hard that it's really been difficult to stop thinking about them. And I realize as well, the panelists and the variety of panelists that you've had just shows that everyone has just been doing their best, given the circumstances and given that there have been so many unknowns. But I guess what I'm still struggling with is how is it even possible to fathom how everything could have unraveled so badly? Because these problems that are here now at the forefront didn't just appear as a result of the pandemic. My situation is about my dad, and he was entering long-term care right at the beginning of the pandemic. And people who are entering their care, they're embarking on a new chapter in their life that finds them all of a sudden apart from their familiarity, their security, and the daily interactions of home. It's the little things in the environment that matter so much. The purrs and pats of our dogs and cats, the sound of tidying up dishes in the back room, the smell of dinner cooking, or hearing your favorite songs on the radio, having snoozes and cuddles on the couch, going outside for a bit of fresh air in the backyard, or even just going for a drive to get a change of scenery. These are the things that we now know that we take for granted. And they're gone when you move into long-term care. All of a sudden, you're in new surroundings with new sounds, new smells, new routines, and it's frightening and it's unfamiliar. And if you happen to live with daily brain change like my dad does, it's really hard to process. Separation like this also takes its toll on the person's person, so their caregiver, who and their family members who now are living apart from their loved one. There's pain, there's grief, there's guilt, and there's endless worry. And all of those familiar routines that I just described, well, they're gone for that person too. So let me tell you a little bit about my dad, whose experience moving into long-term care was bumpy. His facility remains COVID-free to my knowledge, and he just received his first vaccination about 2 weeks ago. So there's some good news. Dad's been living with vascular dementia for almost 6 years. Probably 6 years since diagnosis, but the telltale signs reared their head probably about a year before that. He lived at home with his wife in Nova Scotia, where he retired, and she was his wife and also his primary caregiver. I would go down as often as I could, and I would try and stay for at least a month, at least once, maybe twice a year if I could swing it. My last visit, and I'm so thankful I got it in, was the month of February in 2020. Dad had been on a waiting list for long-term care for about 2 years, and it's part of the gamble that you have to take when you're applying to long-term care in the province of Nova Scotia to get a list for a placement. The list is long, as it is in many provinces, and in Nova Scotia, it's managed by long-term care coordinators who do assessments and they make recommendations about the category of care that someone will require. Dad was supposedly in February supposed to be within about 6 months of having a vacancy open up. So we thought, okay, that's probably good based on what we're experiencing, what we're seeing. But Dad's wife got a call on March 1st saying she had 24 hours to take a spot or not. And what happens if you don't take the spot in Nova Scotia, there is no deferral process. So if you decide to decline, you have to start the entire application process again from step one, which would potentially be another 2 years. And, you know, I guess the timing is never going to be right, but, you know, we didn't feel that it was appropriate to not accept that spot, even though it wasn't in Dad's preferred facility. So he moved in during the first week of March. I flew down to help, of course. The last time I saw him in person was Tuesday, March 10th, 2020. Dad moving in was not happy. He was not settling, as they said. His wife was going in daily after March 10th to try and help him adjust and get him comfy, get him cozy, help him understand the relentless "why am I here" question that he kept saying. Unfortunately, the facility went into full lockdown within 7 days of his arrival. So that wasn't very good. He was stressed beyond belief. He thought his family abandoned him. We would call him on the phone and get nurses to help him because he couldn't answer the phone himself anymore, but we could at least have conversations with him. He thought we had abandoned him. He told me that in phone conversations. I found an old iPad mini and we set it up so it would automatically answer, and I sent it down to his wife and said, is there any way we can get it into that facility? And that turned out to be a lifeline for us, because then at least Dad, we could drop in. So his wife or I could drop in, and we didn't require any staff help or anything like that. It would automatically pick up, and we could coax him over to our voices so he could hear where we were coming from and talk to him and see him. And we could turn on things like his Google Home, which has a playlist and things like that. So we were, what we could do, even being distanced, trying to help out with his care. What we started to notice was that he was looking increasingly agitated and unwell. He was angry. He's not normally an angry person, and he was expressing himself angrily because he was so frustrated, and there was something wrong. And he knew there was something wrong. He would tell me, Mel, there's something wrong here. I don't understand what's going on. There's something wrong. But living with brain change, you don't always have all of the words to express yourself any longer. So he couldn't really articulate exactly what he was experiencing, but he was progressively going downhill and going downhill fast. He was losing weight from the time that he entered the facility to 7 weeks later. I think he lost probably about 20 pounds. He was exit seeking. That was the term that the facility was using to, in our conversations with them, to describe what they believed to be a behavioral problem. They started administering sedatives to him to try and help him sleep because he was exit seeking. That turned out to be catastrophic. I could see the medications that they were giving to him by looking at his insurance claims, the dates, the doses, the names of the medications, so I could look them up. It got worse. The tablet form of medications that they were giving to him weren't bringing about their desired results to his behavioral problems. They asked us to stop dropping in on the iPad for visiting and to stop calling with him so that he could settle down. And we did. We were desperate to try and help him, so we were compliant and trying. We were told at every corner, every turn, that this was simply a progression of the dementia and things were just going to continue down this path. Nothing was helping. There were 2 times where apparently his behavior was violent and they were afraid. So they administered an antipsychotic sedative to him, injected. Each time they did that, they phoned the RCMP to help restrain him so that they could give him the medication. His wife phoned me that second time and asked me to drop in on the iPad because she was in tears. I guess they'd contacted her. They said, this is what's happening. And it just so happened that the iPad was positioned in such a way that I could see what was happening to him in the room. He was in the corner. There were a number of staff around him. Everyone was talking, trying to get him to calm down so that they could catch him to give him the injection. And he was, responding like this. He was defending himself because from his standpoint, he was being attacked. And it just so happened that in the corner of the iPad, I could see a leg of someone in uniform. And I started shouting out, saying, hello, 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 is anyone there? I'm on the iPad. And the RCMP officer actually turned and saw me and picked up the iPad and said, oh, this is what's happening. And I said, I understand that. Can I speak with the nurse in the room right away? So it ended up that he did receive the drug. I asked her to please clear everyone out of the room. And I asked her to set the iPad on his lap so that I could try and help understand and just listen to him. And he said, no one's listening to me. I did that for about 20 minutes. That's about as long as it took for the drug to start taking effect and making him sleepy. And then the nurse came back in to check on him and he went to bed. Long story short, I think it happened one more time after that. And that was their threshold for dealing with his behavioral problem. And they sent him to the hospital the next time. So they had the RCMP come and help escort him to go to the hospital. He spent hours waiting there on a stretcher. I talked to the doctor who took him in at the emergency room in that hospital, and I didn't get a lot of information. They weren't sure if he was going to stay there. He ended up being transferred to a regional hospital. I'm so glad he did. He ended up staying there for the next 7 weeks. So he had been in the long-term care center for 7 weeks, and he spent the next 7 weeks in the hospital recovering. The physician who admitted him to the hospital at the regional center took one look at his chart, one look at him, and said delirium. And that was, he was diagnosed with delirium, and he also had an underlying undiagnosed medical issue that was not being addressed. And that was causing him pain. And that was why he was trying to express himself and he couldn't articulate what was happening. To them, it was a behavioral issue. The unfortunate part of all of this is that the trauma, I think, of those first 7 weeks actually, and the medication and the delirium resulted in him losing a lot of the language that he still had. So he has pretty severe aphasia now. He struggles to find words. He's to the point where, you don't have a lot of interactive conversation with him anymore, which, again, to some people, what they would say, well, that's just a natural progression of the disease. But I know my dad. I know the conversations that we had. And I also have faith in the doctors that treated him at the hospital. So I know that there's a correlation there. We kept on hearing that, we didn't know whether he was going to be allowed back into the original facility, to which we were kind of struggling, saying, well, where does he go from here? What happens? Apparently, he potentially could have been a candidate to go into a different facility that dealt with people with behavioral issues. The irony in all of this is that when he was first transported to the emergency room at the local hospital, he was fine. He was happy, he was sitting up, he was talking to the nurses. When he got to the other hospital, he was fine. He was calm. He was being heard. He was happy. They called him the marathon man because he would do walking all over the place. And one of the wonderful things that happened actually when he was in the hospital is the rules permitted his wife to come and visit him in the hospital. So I actually think that helped him tremendously, being allowed to have physical contact with someone he loved and trusted in an unfamiliar setting. Long story short, he's back at his original place that he moved into. Everyone was astonished when he came back, saying that he's so calm now. He's so good. Again, focused on that behavioral aspect of it, which is a little bit frustrating. His wife and I have both keep a pretty close eye on what's going on now. We alert them to things where we think things are going off the rails a little bit or things need to be checked on. And we just kind of do our best to go from there. So I know it's not everything, but it gives you a bit of a background. It has been frustrating and it has been upsetting. And it's something that I can hardly wait till I'm allowed to go back to the province to get a chance to spend some time with him.
Thanks, Melody. You've spoken about your story, and I know when I first heard it, I was in such shock. And I do remember one part I didn't hear you say here is when he went to that regional hospital, they found that he had been severely over-medicated. And I remember hearing that and thinking, my goodness, because we've all heard stories about long-term care homes when they get to a certain level and they're not staffed well enough to deal with what they should be doing, that they medicate.
Exactly.
We're told that's not the case, but we sometimes know that is still the case. So, but to me, it was shocking to hear that something in Nova Scotia is so similar to Quebec and Ontario, even though here we're being told the East Coast does everything right as far as long-term care. And they just say, look, there's no COVID. And that's how we know we did it right, which is great for infection, IPAC. But when you see all the underlying stuff, it's the same.
Yeah.
And that's why we're asking for national standards. Thank you very much. I just wanted to now introduce from British Columbia, Beverly Hambler.
Thank you so much. These stories, I've been a care aide since '89, and I was really obviously worried about putting mom into long-term care. Hers was assisted living, but in BC it's called long-term care light. But these stories, Kitra and Melody, just show how much we need essential visitors to be an actual right for those in care. And it's been really hard because my story hasn't been acknowledged here in this province at all. And so thank you all for giving me this platform, especially today. It would have been Mom's 98th birthday today. So it's fitting. It's very fitting. I've just recently received her Freedom of Information request from the facility, the progress notes, and they're quite disturbing. So I've actually had to organize and kind of edit some of my speech and do some of it on the fly, or not speech, presentation, just to kind of stay focused. It's a very convoluted story. When I speak of Mom's assisted living facility, she was there for 4 years. I'm also speaking of the company that's employed me for the last 15 years as a care aide. So that created a whole level of dynamics, which is why I tried to go through the proper channels when this happened. So a quick synopsis, Mom was admitted to assisted living 4 years ago. She was 79 pounds at 4 feet 5 inches, 92 years old, almost 93 years old. She was described in her charts through many medical and hospital visits previously as spunky, chatty, a great historian. She was politically motivated. Her hobbies were politics, and that was always on the news. So she qualified and fit in quite well with assisted living. She did, however, throughout the years, she was outliving everybody. So depression sets in. With depression, especially in seniors, they stop eating. That was Mom's main thing, which is why she finally, just quickly, she actually helped me raise my son. Once he started university, she wanted to be independent and move in her own little apartment. And at 88 years old, she did that and didn't need assisted living until 92, almost 93. And that was for depression. She was admitted, like I said, at 79 pounds. So keeping her weight up was always the main directive. Fast forward to first lockdown. My sister and I were informed by the assisted living manager that we were allowed to be essential visitors due to Mom's frailty, age. She ate better when family was around. And that, like I said, was the main thing, keeping her eating. But after a few weeks, the essential visitor status was rescinded. Again, like everybody else, she tried to cooperate. I was working with the company. Of course, I'm going to cooperate. I understood what was going on. It was a panic time. But you still, as a care aide, I still always had it like, I better keep track, better keep contact, like we all do. So between my sister and I, we would phone Mom's facility. We'd been instructed as families not to phone the care aides and talk to them directly, but to funnel all our queries through the manager, which we did for almost over 5 weeks. I would phone 1 to 2 times a week, ask how Mom is, always being reassured Mom was fine. Even though before, when we were essential visitors, she was starting to show some signs of depression. That's why I was concerned. But every time, no, your Mom's fine. It was always the same person I talked to. So May the 6th came. Mom had a fall. Again, the assisted living manager said she was fine. And that weekend, Mother's Day weekend, my sister phoned and spoke with the carry against instructions. She was told by the care aide that Mom hadn't eaten for quite some time, and the care aide was quite worried about the condition she was in. I phoned back, talked to her, asked her a few questions, and I asked her to call the assistant living manager because I wanted to see Mom now. And when she got back to me, she quoted the assisted living manager. I could tell she was distressed about it. But she said that the manager said depression is not a reason for essential visit. And because Mom was physically fine, she could not have essential visitors. But she would have the care aide stay with her. So I phoned that Monday. I asked for a wait. Okay, calm down, Bev. She told me they don't do weights in assisted living. And so she didn't know Mom's weight regardless. I said, I've always weighed Mom. Since she gained weight doing well in assisted living, she's always maintained tipping 100 pounds. I need a weight if I have to get a doctor's order. That's not an issue. So it wasn't until that Friday morning, 5 days later, I phoned, left 2 messages. She got back to me and informed me that my mom, who was now 97 years old, we missed her birthday. She'd missed mine, and her grandsons were all within the week of each other. That Mom was now 71 pounds, which was almost 10 pounds less than her admittance weight. She said she had to get a hold of the health authority because obviously I said, I'm going to see her now. Actually, my specific words were, you tell the health authority that it's not going to look bad for a carry to 15 years to pull her mother out of the facility just to be able to see her after all this. So I actually wasn't informed until 4 p.m. later that day, Friday before weekend, that I could see Mom. At that time, the first time I saw Mom, she had previously, before lockdown, been snipping her waistband in her pants because she's getting a little chubby. And she was wearing those pants the first time I saw her, and they fell off her hips. The first time her community care nurse saw her, she put in for palliative orders immediately. And it was very obvious Mom was suffering some mental anxieties. She could not be left alone, like at all. Not even if I said, Mom, this was a previously cognitive woman. You know, Mom, I just have to run around the corner of the bathroom. Nope, not at all. So the manager at this time was claiming natural decline. But all of Mom's care aides, when I spoke to them, said they'd been reporting that Mom was suffering. One told me that she told the manager verbally that she didn't think my mom was going to survive much longer. And this was back in April. So obviously I put in a complaint. They were pushing to help to have Mom go into long-term care, which I was refusing at that point. And it actually ended up where I took an LOA from my employer, 15 years, to pull my mother out of one of the facilities to care for her at home. And I pulled her out permanently. This is where I have to freewheel a bit because of the freedom of information I just received. I was told by the assisted living registry that my complaint I put in was unsubstantiated because the progress notes of the facility show that Mom was not declining until May, and that's when the assisted living manager became aware of it. So that's their version. That's the report I received from them in November. The report I just received last week, the actual progress reports written by the care aides. At the time, for the 5-week period, I was being told my mother was physically fine and not suffering signs of depression. The wording in the progress notes by the care aides used to describe her were weak, unable to stand, labored breathing, perspiring, shortness of breath, more than usual, unresponsive. The May 9th, when my sister talked to the care aide and we were told that mom was, oh, and they also charted actually that the assisted living manager was notified quite often. She was also asked if she needed an ambulance more than once. So at the time, they were telling me my mother was fine. They were asking her if she needed an ambulance. This is a 97-year-old who, that generation is always, no, 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 don't bother anybody. No, no. She knew what was going on. She knew it was a pandemic. She knew all of that. She wasn't going to be that added worry for everybody. They knew from past history to phone me regardless. They always did before. Up till that point, even when I was essential visitor, I would get a call from the manager to come and sit with mom if she seemed depressed and that. So I knew mom had a mental break. I can pretty much tell by the progress notes when she had it, and it was on that Mother's Day weekend. May 9th, 12:10 a.m., she started calling for help and was on the call bell. And at 1:15 and at 8:50, oh, sorry, 12:10, 1:15, 2:15, 4:45, and then was unable to lay down, unable to stand up, very confused when talking to. She started calling for help at 12:10 a.m., day before Mother's Day, and she actually never stopped calling for help until she passed on December 18th, a week before Christmas. It was at the point where I thought, even as a care aide since '89, I thought bringing her home, TLC, my direct care, 24 hours a day would be enough. And it wasn't. By October, she had to be put on antipsychotics just to be able to relax and sleep at night, so I could sleep at night so she wouldn't go back into a facility. She never recovered from the weight loss. She did gain a bit of weight once we were allowed to be essential visitors, but she never actually recovered. So that's mom's story. And that's why there are, putting on everyone on notice now, there are going to be changes to long-term care. Because one thing she taught me well was not to shut up. And that's just starting this week.
Thanks, Beverly. Yeah, thank you. And you're with the right group, because Vivian and I don't ever shut up either. It's true. And you know what? We need to hear stuff like that. And we need to join together and speak louder so that, you know, it doesn't get put back in the background again. It's really important. I'm really sorry to hear about what happened to your mom. And you know what? The one thing that I heard you say that really touched me is fighting not to put her into long-term care. And I don't think people realize, even when Melody was saying, you know, the choice was taken away and they were shortlisted to whatever was available. If you don't take it now, then you have to wait for 2 more years. And the level of guilt that brings to the family, not wanting to put them in, but knowing that you have to put them in, and fighting to not want to put them in. And you just wish that you could bring them home, but it's beyond what you can do. I don't think people understand what that feels like, how that weighs on you. So I felt that too. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it. So our next speaker is someone that I know. We met because of Orchard Villa. I lost my dad there. He lost his mom there. So Fred, thank you so much for agreeing to come and speak with us today. And I'll pass it over to you.
Oh, thanks, Kathy. I'm hearing a lot of similar things here from everybody. And so I'll just go over my mom's story, and there are some similarities that everybody has. So my mother was Ruth Kramer. She lived in Orchard Villa from September 3rd, 2019 until her death on April 19th, 2020. Prior to this, she was living in a retirement home. She was trying to cope with her Alzheimer's and dementia diagnosis until she had an anger episode which put her in the hospital on February 3rd, 2019. She remained in the hospital until her admission into Orchard Villa. My mother always told me, do not put me in a nursing home. I will not go. Unfortunately, I was left with no other option. On the day of her admission, they were not ready for her. Her bed had no sheets, and they could not find any to put on it. So they had to lay her in a precarious position on a plastic mattress for about 3 hours, while my wife and I were doing some intake paperwork. On the same day, later that afternoon, I pressed the call button for a PSW to toilet my mother. Well, after 45 minutes, a PSW finally came to see what we wanted. And meantime, the whole time this buzzer was sounding at the nursing station, she said she had to get a second person to help her. So she came back in about 10 minutes to put my mom on the toilet. After after they got her on the toilet, they left her there all by herself. And she was calling out for me. So my wife went in with her until a PSW came back. They should never left her on the toilet by herself. I talked to the nursing supervisor about this incident, and I asked her if this was a normal wait time after the call bell was pushed. I said she could have been laying on the floor bleeding out. And she said it's mandated for 2-minute response. However, she said we're very understaffed. And she said if you have a complaint, to call the ministry. This was not a very good first day. I left second guessing myself as what I'd done. Shortage of staff was never ending issue at Orchard Villa. If anything went wrong, as always you heard, we're short staffed. In the first few weeks, she fell out of her bed twice. First time she injured her arm and her hand. The second time she injured her arm and her left knee. After the falls, they put a fall mat beside her bed, as well as a fall sensor from her bed to her body, and also on her wheelchair. Quite often when we visited, we found the tether of the alarm was not even attached to her. As well, we also noticed quite often with other residents that the alarms are not attached either. As we walk down the hallways, there's always constant sounds of bells, alarms going off, no response from staff. It seemed like a normal, everyday thing to hear all these alarms going off, and just quite normal. She did settle into her new way of life. She used to get very excited when my wife and I would come to visit her. She'd always say, "Oh, thank God you're here. When are we going home?" In January 2020, she had another fall out of her wheelchair this time, flattened her face in front of the nursing station, and was taken to hospital. Her face was all black and blue, and we were told she had a fracture on the tip of her nose. But where were the nurses and PSWs? My last visit with my mom was on March 13th, 2020. It was just one day before the lockdown occurred. We had a really good visit. After March 14th, each day became more and more difficult because of sporadic communication or lack of. And when I did get through, I was told the same thing each time. Your mom's happy, she's eating, she's drinking, like no worries. To my surprise, I got a call April 15th that my mother tested positive for COVID-19. I was in complete shock and did not even know she had been tested or had any symptoms. The caller asked me, "Were you not called?" I said, "No, I was not." At this point, I became worried about my mom's health and safety. What else did I not know about? So the next day I had a FaceTime call with my mom, and she looked awful. She was swollen, lethargic, tears in her eyes. When I called on the Friday, I was told she had a low-grade fever and lethargic, otherwise no change. On the Saturday, I was told she had not eaten breakfast or lunch and could not swallow her medication. On the Sunday, I received a call that she passed. The caller offered his condolences and asked what funeral home you'll be using and what do you want to do with her belongings. I trusted Orchard Villa was looking after my mom as they downplayed her symptoms to me. I assumed she was not as bad as she actually was. Thinking back, I wonder if my mother would have contracted or survived COVID-19 had Orchard Villa had the proper protocols in place to deal with this horrible pandemic. My mom survived the Second World War, heart attack, cancer, and numerous falls. She was a strong lady, and after reading the military report in May, I feel that my mother had suffered from starvation, neglect, and a broken heart during these last few weeks of her life. I just hope and pray she did not die alone and that somebody was with her. I'll never know. I also hope no other families ever have to go through this again. It's a horrible tragedy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Fred. Yeah, hearing your story always kind of hits closer to home, I guess, because of Orchard Villa. We know what a disaster it was in there. And, it's an emotional day for me. Try not to get too emotional. Today is the 1-year anniversary that I started asking for help. We knew things were going wrong. So, Vivian, you might have to step in. Yeah.
Yep. Anytime.
Yeah, it's, we can all I'm going to go to gallery view so that we can all open up our mics and talk together. Just really quickly, I wasn't going to share my dad's story, but after hearing all of yours, I feel like a weird connection that there is with all of us when we have to go through this stuff. And I'm 2 days away from the 1-year anniversary. Vivian, step in.
Hey, you're gonna make me cry.
Sorry.
I get it. I mean, trust me, I hold back tears all the time I hear family talk because it's the same story over and over. And I just don't understand how we're a year in and nothing has really changed. And I just wish that all of our elected officials actually lived this nightmare that the vast majority of the families have lived. I have not heard one positive story of, yeah, this was a great experience in long-term care. Not from one family, not from one. There is one nightmare story after another. And all of the things you have told me, I have heard from families across Canada. Chemical restraint, abuse, improper care, improper training, staff not knowing how to properly identify and treat dementia. The vast majority of the residents have dementia, not understanding what the signs are. Family know what the signs are, family know how to help, but when you shut them out, you shut out a key source of protection. And not only that, the very clear and obvious trauma from isolating people. I don't understand, and it makes me very angry, how these people don't realize the impact of being confined to a small room. Many can't even get to the window to look outside and get some sort of fresh air. And you're stuck in that room, quite often without a TV, without, a telephone, or if you have it, you can't often access it unless you have somebody there to help you. And then you wonder why these individuals deteriorated so wildly and why family had to stand by, traumatized, knowing that if they were in there, they could have helped. And we could have properly and safely reintegrated family long ago, and we're still locking them down despite knowing everything that we know, all the military reports, all of the stories, the thousands of stories that have come out, and how there is not a greater rush by our officials to do something about this immediately is frankly disgusting to me. And I understand the pain of these families because there is no forgiveness without some sort of reckoning. Right. And this is what I hear from families. They want change because without some sort of apology, acknowledgement of wrongdoing, some sort of glimmer of hope that their loved ones, their lives weren't lost in vain. They will never get over this and they deserve justice. And I feel the anger of all of you. And I haven't even lived with a loved one in COVID. My loved one passed right before COVID, but I was able to empathize because I'm a human being, which a lot of these elected officials don't seem to understand the empathy gene, and be able to understand what it would be like being separated from your loved one while knowing you could help.
I don't think people realize, especially when you're going, how traumatizing it is. And I take it first to the residents who are living separate from the people that they love and that they need. And then when you go through things like having to fight for your family, how traumatizing. It's not just losing a dad for me. I am traumatized by the way he died.
Yeah.
Really horrible. Yeah.
Well,
And
one thing if possible, I'd like to throw this in too. I've been wanting to get this out, and this seems to be the perfect conversation. Fred, you're actually the one that with your thoughts on the as a care aide. Some insight. A care aide working in a facility at the same time her mom was isolated. I have yet to see an operator anywhere in this country who has come out and said, our facility can't handle this during the pandemic. Can we get some help, please? That alone should be a crime. Yes. A crime. Because at the time I wasn't allowed to see my mother and restrictions were on for others. I worked with someone who just the day before came back from the epicenter in Manila, Spain. We had various housekeeping issues. I actually had gone to my manager at my facility and told her that the other less senior staff are scared to say anything. I'm not, but I let her know we need added support. We need it yesterday. We're literally, and this is hard when you really care for your residents, but I told her we're literally at the point where we're prioritizing who's falling and who's getting saved. All the fall alarms are going off. There's only 2 of us. It's high secure dementia. We can't save everybody. Her answer, there's no added care in the budget. Do your best. At that point, I actually lost it. And I said, you know what? I do my best every day I come to work. I can't do my best anymore. Now I'm coming to work and I can no longer do my best. And I literally stormed out of her office. And that was one of the days I phoned Mom's facility, told the manager the day that I'd had, and I said, are you sure Mom's okay? And she said, yes, we're not short-staffed like you are. Yes, they were. Yes, they all are. Our government's new facilities were short-staffed before the pandemic, and they locked them up in there anyway. Regardless of, all they needed was an essential visitor, someone who knew them, who knew the immediate moment they were starting to decline and could have taken intervention.
So let me just step in, Beverly, and I want to say that there is no doubt I was lied to as well. Dad was okay, everything was fine, and meanwhile he was dying with the fever and COVID. So when we look at all of this, I have a follow-up question actually for Kitra afterwards, but first I want to ask this one. What do you guys want to see? Like, if we're talking about national standards, and Vivian and Melissa and I have talked about it a lot, right? We want to see accountability and staffing and proper training, but what does national standards mean to you? What does it look like to you? What do you want to see change in long-term care? Melody, if you don't mind, I'll start with you.
So, I mean, there's obvious things. One of the things that I think that could help tremendously is actual, clear, compassionate, transparent, authentic, and regular communication. You don't hear things. You hear things when it's a catastrophic event, or you hear, you maybe get a newsletter every once in a while. I have my mother-in-law happens to be in long-term care in Manitoba, and she's in a completely different circumstance than my dad. My husband receives regular weekly updates, even if there isn't a lot to say from the facility. They share what's been going on. They share when they did have COVID in that facility, how they were managing it, and they shared some of what they were doing to turn that facility around to allow people to come back in again. And what they did was they were constructing a special airtight chamber room that people could go into so that they didn't have to bring in outside diseases and viruses. That contrasted with some of what I've seen as communications from my experience was night and day. So I think that you have to change the dialogue. And it even goes down to the minutia of the type of language that's being used, right? We all have jargon in whatever sector we happen to work in, but I kind of have been thinking a lot about it as an observer, and I'm wondering if the type of language being so clinical helps to rationalize it and sanitize what's going on and keep a distance, right? And it's very clear that priorities are expense management first, and then the business of caring for someone's biological needs, not their mental needs.
Can I just stop for a second and say the wording on that? The business of caring.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. The business of caring. We need to remove that business part and just make it about caring.
Yeah.
Kitra, I wanted to ask you really quickly, because you're in a unique situation that's somewhat similar to Melody, where you're not in the same vicinity as your parent in long-term care. So how do you deal with that? And then also, what would you like to see change for national standards?
Yeah, I'm living in Tucson at the moment, and most of the pandemic up until December, I was doing all the advocacy from afar and connecting with families from afar. And in a sense, it didn't make a difference that I wasn't in Montreal, because everyone was locked out. And so all of the initiatives we did to like get meals for the workers, to get, and we did so many different things, like all the families banded together, trying to do different things to help the workers. Like I was able to organize from afar, and then I wasn't any more distant from my father than my sisters or my mom in Montreal, because we were all just communicating over Zoom we installed cameras in his room so that we could monitor the care and also communicate if his internet went down, and that was our lifeline, being able to communicate from afar. There wasn't a day where we weren't in dialogue with him. I mean, each of us were in dialogue with him at least once a day. And that's because cognitively, he's completely there. It's physically that he requires 24-hour care, basically, to do anything, to eat, to dress, to. But it was heartbreaking. Like we've spoken, some of your stories are about weight loss. My father also lost about 30 pounds throughout the pandemic. And that's, just again, that's the result of being short-staffed. Also not, I think it also speaks to a problem within long-term care, that supplemental care, the fact that so many families have to hire outside help, have to do range of motion. Like in my father's case, no one would move his body if it wasn't for all of the systems of volunteers and family members who go in and do the extra range of motion, the physiotherapy. Like he's been living in his facility for 9 years, and it's just not, it shouldn't be his long-term home. Like he's fully capable to be a part of the community if those resources were put into his hands and he could decide where he wanted to live. So, for me, part of the conversation about how to improve long-term care is also a conversation, how can we allow people to live at home with the resources that they need or live within the community or in group home settings. Because everything within his facility is geared towards essentially short stays. Like people aren't expected to stay as long as they do. And so then it's not built up to be a home environment in that same way. His dream is to come home.
Well, and you know what, we focus a lot on national standards, and the importance of that is to fix the immediate that needs to be fixed now. But I think we all agree that, hopefully once we get there with the proper movement from our federal government in coordination with the provinces and territories, that the next thing we need to look at is in-home care. Because you know what, I think we all, if we could have kept them home longer with the proper aid and help, we would have. I know I would have. I was trying to. Fred, I just want to bring it back to you and just say, we've talked, you've seen a lot of stuff. I've been talking a lot about national standards, and I know we've talked in person from a distance.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel? What do you think we need to change and push for?
I really think if we take the profit out of the long-term care, that's going to take care of a lot of issues. I didn't realize how much money that places like Orchard Villa was making, and just even the structure, the way they have Southbridge Care homes, and they have extended cares doing the management or the daily running. Yeah. It's just too many people in there. There's too much profit. Take the profit out, give it to some of the workers, make it a little bit happier, a little bit more workers. I think that would make a huge difference, and that would take a lot of problems out of the long-term care.
Yeah.
Not everything, but I think it's a big start.
Yeah. Thank you, Vivian. I'm gonna let you just say like a few words, and then I'll close it up, because surprisingly, we're at time. I'm so
The time
fascinated.
flies by.
Right?
in these,
Right.
yeah. I mean, what can I say? I thank everyone for sharing these stories. I know it's not easy. I get very angry hearing them, but even sharing them, I know how hard it is for all of you. So I just really want to thank you, and we're going to keep fighting. We're going to keep doing what we have to do, because this is unacceptable. It has to change, and we're going to keep doing what we have to do. That's it.
Yeah.
And just,
And I want to say thank you guys. I know from experience how hard it is sometimes to come and say these things, especially when you're talking about such hurt and pain. So thank you, because you know what? Canadians need to hear it, and we need to keep saying it and keep saying it. And more than that, well, Canadians first need to hear it. Our government needs to hear it. They need to know we want change, and that we stand side by side and we demand it. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys being here.
You're welcome.
thank you, everybody.